facing betrayal and loss. How does Olwen turn the tide to become the leader of the Moon River Pack, prepare for her first child with Elfalandin, and confront the reappearance of her former mate Aaron? When love meets tradition, how will the sparks fly? Subscribe to our channel to find out first. Chapter 38 Resolution. Having been among those instructed to head to the underground shelters, Gammy Marissa, Elise, Jessie, some of the other gaze and nevertheless rose to the challenge as a small handful of rogues began to sneak past into Moon River Pack borders. Elise and Gamma Marissa had opted to stay above ground, assisting Dr. Enzo in bringing him pack warriors that required urgent medical attention. Elise had been on one of her runs, zipping in and out of the masses of wolves when she was pounced upon by a rogue. Rather than attack her, however, the rogue dragged her behind a large rock, shifting back and leering at her. "What a pretty and smelling Omega. I might spare you and make you my pet." The rogue chuckled and ran a hand through her fur, prompting Ember to snarl and bite his fingers. His face turned ugly quickly after that, and he shifted and lunged out, getting very far before a dark shape crammed into his side and practically bashed him against the side of the large rock. The man emitted a cry of pain as both he and Dr. Enzo shifted back, the latter staring him down murderously. "Stay the fuck away from my mate." This would be the one and only time Dr. Enzo was seen in the field, before he shifted back into Eston, lightly nuzzling Ember and helping her up before they helped another injured warrior back to his first aid site. Jessie had ended up near the south gate with Delta Lincoln, using what fighting skills she did know to injure and maim as many rogues as possible, being flanked by a few warriors now and then. A few other Omgazers stationed themselves around the inner areas of the pack territory, using injections of wolfsam that Gamma Marissa had given them for self-defense to finish off any rogues that managed to make it in. And then there was Ludi Olwen, who had by now shifted into Opal again. A good distance from the Moon River Pack, with their end still forgotten and unconscious up against a nearby tree, and Kiara circled each other. And then Kiara made the first move and leapt for the smaller wolf. With Olwen recalling the training that she had been put through by Delta Cassidy, Opal swiftly rolled aside, Kiara landing on the forest floor with a hiss of irritation. Opal did not give the rust-colored wolf any time to recover before she pounced onto Kiara's back, hooking her claws into the wolf flank and sinking them in deep. Kiara howled angrily, shaking from side to side in an attempt to shake Opal off her. The silvery grey wolf held on for dear life, only pushing her claws in tighter. Remembering Cassidy's advice, she attempted to get a grip on Kiara's throat, managing a loose bite before the other wolf tossed her off. Kiara huffed and shook out her coat, clearly channeling Kylie's frustration. She'd expected defeating Olwen to be easier than this, so the fact that Opal was still standing now was already a setback to Kylie's plan. She'd wanted to show some mercy to the Omega, but if she didn't need to. Opal righted herself quickly, going for another lunge at Kiara. The rust-colored wolf met her attack, her jaws immediately heading for Opal's throat. Sensing it coming, the silvery grey she-wolf ducked to head out of the way, clamping down onto one of Kiara's legs instead. Kylie had been one of the Silver Arrow Pack's most skilled warriors for a reason. She was strong and knew exactly how and where to strike. But if it were even possible, Olwen and Omega, whom hadn't really known how to fight until years ago, was actually matching her. She managed to either block or avoid Kiara's more fatal strikes, and counter with attacks on her own. While Opal's inflicted injuries were not as severe, Kylie knew that if this kept going, that Olwen could gradually wear her down. And yet, despite now attempting to focus on blocking and dodging Opal, this proved surprisingly challenging for Kiara and Kylie as well. She'd witnessed how Olwen trained under Beta Caden in the Silver Arrow Pack, and the Omega had not been this fast, both in evading and attacking. Kylie found herself shockingly wide open for many of the Luna's attacks, ranging from scratches down the side of Kiara's head and tufts of her rust-colored fur falling off, to deep gashes of blood that began to rapidly appear all over the wolf's body. It was safe to say that Kylie had barely been evenly matched by another wolf she met in battle. There were of course a handful of exceptions, but until now she'd found the prospect of Olwen being one of them laughable. She was supposed to be delicate, frail and weak, to crumble at the slightest push. But with each wound scratched and dug into her wolf's flank, legs and neck, Kiara was doing her absolute best to keep up their speed and ferocity while holding off the pain that was beginning to seep into her body. Opal had wounds as well but was still going at her strong, making Kylie panic as she imagined the humiliation she would once again endure by losing to the Omega. Not just in front of the Moon River pack, which included some of her former pack mates, but the rogues that she had managed to sway to her side by mating with their leader. Kylie directed Kiara's attention briefly to the hollow of a nearby tree as they wrestled with Opal, trying to get a good grip into her fur with their claws. It was time for Plan B. Determination, hatred and adrenaline raged through Opal's body as she attacked Kiara again and again, while owls and hisses of pain coming from the other wolf as parts of her fur was ripped off, and blood began to well up from all her scars and gashes. She was determined to put an end to the schemes of Kylie Paxton today, no matter how ruthless she had to be. Kiara was doing her best to retaliate, but despite Opal's body being covered in injuries as well, the silver-grey wolf looked to be holding in her own pain impressively in comparison. It helped that the forest reminded her of Audiobook with the smell of the tree still persistent with the emerging scent of blood. And then Kiara shoved Opal back and rapidly changed back into Kylie, who took advantage of Opal's surprise to quickly retrieve something from behind her and jab it painfully into the wolf's neck. Kylie watched as Opal tensed up, her blue eyes wide as the severe dose of wolfsbane entered her veins. The silver-grey wolf tried to keep herself up, only for her limbs to give way quickly and cause her to drop to the floor. Howling and whining in pain, Opal began to shift back into Olwen, who curled herself into a terrified ball. Kiara shifted back into Kylie, who bent down and put herself rather condescending at eye level with her now timid and shaking rival. You used wolfsbane, Olwen realized, staring at her fearfully. The sight of the Luna being like this, being cut off from her wolf, shrinking in on herself and terrified brought Kylie a rather sadistic burst of joy. When she'd been caught trying to inject her with it at the function, Olwen must have thought she had escaped Kylie's clutches, only to fall for the same trap now. I didn't want to have to use it, but you gave me no choice. Instead of changing back into Kiara, Kylie pinned the whimpering Luna down and began to throw punches at her. Olwen held up her hands to block them off, but her attempts were flimsy. One of Kylie's blows split open the Luna's infuriatingly soft lip, blood trickling down her chin. Kylie was angrily screaming as she rammed her fist down onto Olwen again and again. You never deserved to be Luna. You never deserved to be mated to an alpha. Those things should be mine, because I'm stronger than you. I've always been stronger than you. She could hear the distant cries of some of the wolves as they saw their precious Luna being pummeled. But no one, not even Stella or Caden, came to Olwen's rescue. Perhaps they finally recognized the truth. Looney Olwen was too pathetic to lead the Moon River pack. Kylie, please. Olwen begged, fear filling her voice as her defenses against the other's relentless ults floundered pitifully. Have mercy on me. To my agent extraordinaire, mythical, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Kylie threw back her head, laughed, socking Olwen in the jaw. You didn't offer me mercy when you cut off my connection with Kiara. The Luna coughed as another fist made it to her nose, more of her blood splattering across the grass in dark specks. No, wait. Wait, please stop. You were right. Kylie paused with her next punch in midair, eyes narrowing down at Olwen in surprise and bewilderment. What? You were right. The wolf whimpered, shaking like a leaf beneath her. Her lovely face was a mess, whether from the bruises and blood or the tears Kylie couldn't tell. You were. Oh right. You have been all along. Olwen broke into sobs. Cuddy recalled how helpless she had felt without sensing Kiara and felt a tiny speck of pity for the Omega, who probably had it much worse without Opal right now. I was born an Omega for a reason, because I'm meant to be weak. And no suitable match for an Alpha. The she-wolf coughed out, her eyes dull and puffy. When I found out I was fated to Aaron, I should have given him up. I was never good enough to keep him. I shouldn't have caused a scene when he chose you. Kylie raised an eyebrow. She'd imagined Olwen saying this to her countless times, especially after Aaron rejected and kicked her out of the Silver Arrow Pack. So hearing Olwen actually doing this to beg and plead for her survival ignited an amount of glee. Not that it would help her the moment Olwen was done with this. Kylie would reach into her chest and rip her heart out. I don't deserve Alpha Andin, and I certainly don't deserve my position as Luna of the Moon River Pack. The woman continued, her voice trembling amid soft sobs, her chest rising and falling erratically. I wish I were as strong as you. Kylie, you deserve to be Luna of the Moon River Pack. I was in over my head to think that I could defeat you. Kylie sniffed, a triumphant look crossing her face. Finally, you say it. One of Kylie's hands held down Olwen by the throat, the latter emitting a weak gurgling noise. But I'm afraid you were too late. Kylie sneered, leaning in and beginning to partially shift her other hand into claws. You should have come to your senses before taking everything that should have been mine. Everything happened so fast. One moment Kylie had Olwen by the throat, preparing to tear her beating heart straight from her chest, and the next Kylie was staggering back with a needle sticking out of her wrist, one that Olwen had suddenly produced hidden from her ankle. She tried to reach for Kiara, but her wolf was in as much pain as she was, and before long a stab of agony shook her. Kylie stumbled to her knees, her amber eyes wide as she heard a final howl from Kiara before she fell silent forever. Her wolf was dead, and from the numbness that was gradually shutting down her human body, Kylie was not far behind. The previously victorious she-wolf stared up at Olwen, who had by now stood up with little to no effort, her eyes shifting to a bright blue. She hadn't lost Opal. Kylie tried to speak and was terrified to find she could barely move her lips now. How? I was prepared. Olwen calmly bent down to retrieve the silver-tipped needle from Kylie's arm. Alpha Andin and I had my gamma and the pack doctor develop an antidote to counteract with the wolfsbane you seem to love using. Knowing that rogues have better access to these kinds of poisons, I had the entire pack take it before the fighting started, including myself. Kylie felt her breathing grow shallower and shallower as she gaped up at Luna Olwen. So, all that simpering and crying. I used to find you intimidating, but now I see that you are just like Bradley and Aaron. Olwen said, staring down at her, stubborn and prideful. Luckily, I used it to my advantage. You little. Kylie wanted to say, but she couldn't speak before the rest of her body gave out and she slumped over onto the forest floor. The last thing she heard as she finally gave up the ghost was Olwen's parting words, making the dying woman realize her worst nightmare had come to pass. This is your ending, Luna Kylie, death at the hands of an Omega. Somewhere at another entrance, a rather large wolf suddenly shook with a howl of agony as he sensed his mate die. Moments before it was cut short as Cerise, Cassidy's wolf, clamped down on his neck. Just like that, the rogues began to panic. Many of them had already fallen with the loss of their leader's mate, that impressively strong she-wolf who had persuaded them to take the Moon River Pack in the first place, meant for sure that all hope was lost. With more howls and whines of terror arising in succession from all sides, the rogues began to turn tail and flee, leaving behind the bodies of the deceased, all of whom by now had shifted back into human form. Star and Coruscant sniffed around cautiously as the wolves made themselves scarce, but their worries were firmly assuaged when they caught sight of Opal padding out from the trees. Both wolves were the first of many to emit yips of joy and relief before bounding over to circle their Luna. Janus and a couple others hurried over to Opal and all the other pack warriors with the cloaks on their backs, allowing everyone to shift and fasten the cloaks over their bodies. Clear out the dead bodies and clean up the Moon River pack, Olwen instructed everyone. For my Luna Kylie is dead in the East Forest, so I will need some members to come with me and collect her. Yes, Luna, everyone chorused, exhausted but relieved for now that the battle was over. Beta Stella and a couple of other warriors accompanied Luna Olwen back to the forest clearing, where just as she left her, Kylie's body was slumped over in the grass, her eyes now dull and lifeless. As the warriors carried Kylie away, Olwen and Stella glanced around before something occurred to them. Where did Aaron go? Stella voiced aloud, heading around the various trees warily. I'm prepared to rip him apart for trying to mark you. Kylie had knocked him unconscious just before challenging Olwen, and judging from how he had vanished from the tree he was lying beneath earlier and was nowhere to be found in the surrounding perimeters, it seemed to indicate he was still alive but had fled. Olwen shook her head. Let's leave him for now. We have to resettle the Moon River pack. Thanks to the training and preparations, the Moon River pack miraculously was able to avoid casualties from the fight against the rogues. There had been a number of wolves who were admitted to intensive care units for the next few days or so, but with Dr. Enzo, Yami Marissa, and the rest of their helpers working endlessly, the pack members were eventually from the brink of demise. All the rogues who had perished were given a decent burial beyond the Moon River pack except for Kylie, whose body was kept in the pack burial home in case surviving members of her family whom had fled to another pack the moment they caught wind of her actions at the function wanted to claim it. After her injuries had healed, Luna Olwen got to work assisting in cleaning up the Moon River pack, removing the stench of blood and fixing up anything that had been damaged or destroyed in the fights. She felt partially responsible for this happening due to Kylie's issues with her, but no one blamed her for it. On the flip side, she was praised for having managed things so well before, during and after the rogue attacks, and for making the effort to visit those who had been physically and mentally affected. It was also hard to miss that it was Luna Olwen who had killed Kylie, an unlickable, but still nevertheless strong and powerful she-wolf. It may not have been an official challenge like the one that Alpha Slandon and Bradley underwent, but it was considered a fight. Olwen wouldn't have needed to use the silver needle she had prepared beforehand if Kylie had used of Wolfsbane to disarm the Luna. To my agent extraordinaire, Mahlin Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. The silver had been a gift of sorts from Jessie, who had taken what amount left that the Silver Arrow pack had kept to themselves while the leaders had been drugged. Olwen had kept it on her before the fighting started. She hadn't wanted to use it, but if she had to, she knew there were next to no repercussions to the death of a rogue. It was a pitiable fact, but for then it had been to her advantage. But the sense of pride and accomplishment that came with being prematurely called the wild strongest Luna was still nothing compared to what Olwen felt when she was tending to some flowers in the pack gardens and heard the distant sound of an approaching car. She didn't stop Opal as her wolf took over her human body and carried her towards the main entrance of the Moon River pack. Landon, whose arms and midsection were still bandaged and healing after his fateful challenge with Bradley, barely had time to inhale the fresh air when Olwen pulled him into a gentle but close embrace, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. The Alpha looked around his Luna to the rest of his pack members gathering around him with joy and relief written all over their expressions, and noted how some of them had similar bandages and even casts. He'd been informed by Olwen via Mind Link about the rogue attacks, along with Erhan and Kylie's appearances, but he knew that they had much to tell each other in person regardless. But that could wait, and Landon couldn't help his own tears when Olwen whispered into his ear, I love you too, Landon. Chapter 39 Finality. Bradley Young of the Silver Arrow pack was found guilty of multiple charges, among them the unlawful possession of illegal substances, first-degree murder of multiple pack members, and the mishandling of his authority as an alpha. Alpha King Scott's face had been solemn as the charges against the man were brought before him, and it only darkened further when Alfred Anden and Luna Olwen summoned and Mrs. Priscilla Walker to the witness stand. There were murmurings of shock and recognition through the small amount of onlookers as Priscilla entered the courtroom, Felix and Tonia by her side, with Tristan behind them and also holding them protectively. Bradley, still handcuffed with Silver, gaped at the two children as if he were looking at phantoms. He hadn't expected his past to catch up with him, at least not within his lifetime. Anyone who looked between the children and the older man could tell they were related. Though Priscilla hadn't seen her ex-lover in years since he chased her from the pack grounds, she was oddly calm and put together, and repeated her testimony confidently to the royal couple and the council. A prior DNA test confirmed that Felix and Tonia were Bradley's children. After hesitance from the accused side to admit the truth, it was time for the final resort. Once Alpha King Scott used his alpha command on Bradley, everything spilled out. The unreasonable exile of Olwen was only the tip of the iceberg now. Also, to consider were he's now confirmed to hide his affair with Priscilla from Lunates, the unlawful murders of Delta Jason Gamma Edric, and finally the attempted murder of then Beta Caden. Not to mention the other instances, he had abused his position as Alpha and then father of the Alpha to hide the truth and get his way. In front of the court, Bradley was executed with a lethal silver injection a very similar way as to how Kylie had died. His wolf briefly took over and let out a soft howl before his body fell limp. It was not a howl of sadness or anger, but relief and freedom. Bastion could finally return to the moon goddess and be with Luna Tess and her wolf. Speaking of Kylie, after her living relatives failed to claim her body, she was buried with all the other rogues. Olwen was not charged for her murder. She had been an exiled rogue of the Silver Arrow Pack at the time of her death, and some of Olwen's pack members had witnessed Kylie challenge her for the position of Luna, and essentially for Solwen's hand. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, who had abused 2 of the illegal substances, conspired with his father multiple times, indirectly caused the death of Jace and Edric and then attempted to force his mark on Luna Olwen, was nowhere to be found in the wilds. His scent had all but faded, leaving his trail cold, and there was a warrant out for his arrest. What remained of the once mighty Silver Arrow Pack could not survive on its own, and as such, the decision was made to make the pack a subsidiary of the Moon River Pack. This in turn led to the slow and steady construction of a bridge between the 2 packs, allowing for easier travel. Once they were of age, however, the right to lead the pack would fall to Felix and Tonia, if they decided to accept. Though reluctant, Priscilla agreed that it was better to let her children decide if they wanted to inherit the leadership of their biological father's pack eventually. The moment the trial was completed, Landon and Olwen were approached by Alpha King Scott and Luna Queen Mia, whom they bowed to respectfully. "Thank you for bringing these matters to our attention, Alpha and Luna Cartwright." The king spoke in his gravelly voice. "It appears we will have to take a closer look at the movements of blacklisted substances among official pack leaders." "You're welcome, but we were just doing what was best for the Evergreen Wilds packs." Landon responded modestly. "Well, you and Luna Olwen still have the official ceremony where both of you and the Moon River Pack will be sworn in as the new representatives." Luna Queen Mila said warmly, "We're looking forward to it. Congratulations on winning the challenge fairly, by the way. Thank you." Landon bowed deeply, with Olwen curtsying as well before the couple headed away. "That went smoothly," Olwen remarked softly, as they headed out of the building into the full air. The trees above were reddish and orange-brown, with plenty of leaves already forming piles on the ground. The Crystal Shine Pack, practically a country of its own compared to the packs, Was the pack of the Alpha King and Luna Queen for a reason? Landon nodded. It took some convincing for Priscilla to bring her family here to testify, which is understandable since she hasn't been treated the best by pack wolves. But it was worth it. Tristan and Priscilla would bring Felix and Tonia back to Apple when once the appointment ceremony was over, and Alwyn noted in her calendar to visit them once every so often. Don't mind me asking, but... Her mate paused. How do you feel regarding Bradley's execution? He was your alpha, and he was going to be your father-in-law for a few years. Alwyn hesitated, trying to grasp at something before shaking her head. Nothing, honestly. I thought he cared for me back then, but in reality he always looked down on me because of my Omega status. And after finding out he cheated on Luna Tess and killed Jace and Edric, I just saw him as a monster. Olwen had managed to do some proper mourning for the deceased Delta and Gamma. Caden had informed Landon and her of their deaths before the challenge, but she had so many other priorities that the full gravity of their deaths didn't hit her until after Alfil and Unhead had returned back alive. Gamma Edric's family, who had moved to the Fireclaw Pack, had been informed of his death. They were devastated it was Edric who had convinced them to leave without him going along, fearing that then Alpha Aaron and Luna Kylie would go after his relatives because of it. But they were also grateful to Landon and Olwen for avenging the former Gamma, and received permission to have him buried in the Fireclaw Pack. Okay, but if you ever need to talk about it, I'm here. Olwen melted as Opal purred. Landon was really quite the mate. Now let's go. We have a ceremony to prepare for. The Alpha murmured, squeezing her hip. A few months later, after the Moon River Pack was officially named the new representative pack of the Evergreen Wilds, things had become slightly busier for everyone but for different reasons. For some like Alfil Andun and Luna Olwen, it meant more work, more events that the representative pack leaders would have to attend, etc. But for others like Elise, it was a matter of self-development. The she, Wolf, was now happily sporting Dr. Edenzo's mark and was in the midst of conceiving a new fashion line to debut her up-and-coming boutique with. Some of the leaders had asked about where Olwen and Stella's dresses had come from during the function, and they both had been quick to credit the young woman who had been then working as catering staff for the event before she took the Wolfsbane to save her Luna. Thanks to some commissions Elise had received, she had enough support and a solid foundation to start her own business. Her parents were still attempting now and then to reconcile in some way with her, weaving some sob stories about her being ungrateful for everything they had put into raising her, and how the whole thing about sending her to other packs to be mated to their alphas or betas was only meant to be motivation. Fortunately, Dr. Enzo or Gamage or Kale were there to intervene if Elise didn't turn them away herself. Luna Olwen hadn't received a formal complaint from Elise yet, but she saw a restraining order on the horizon. One night, Alfil and returned from a meeting with Alpha Silas to find Luna Olwen sitting quietly at their dining table. Olwen, I told you that you didn't need to wait up for me. I did say I was going to end late. I wanted to talk to you, Olwen said, her face unreadable. Landon tilted his head at her in concern. Is everything all right? Olwen produced a small box and pushed it across the table to the Alpha. Unsure of what his mate was feeling, Locke wasn't able to reach Opal either. Landon untied the string around the box and lifted the lid. His mouth immediately dropped open, and for a moment he wasn't able to find words. Why? You're serious? His voice came out as a whisper. The Luna nodded. Is this why you were so preoccupied the past week? When did you? A few days ago. A shy smile grew on Owen's face. I had some suspicions beforehand, so I checked before I went to go see Dr. Enzo. Does anyone else know yet besides him? She shook her head. I haven't said anything to anyone else. But from the way Stella was watching me this week, she might have an idea. By the moon, Gaius. Landon clutched the positive test for a while longer before putting it down and pulling his wife into a hug. "We're going to be parents," he murmured softly. He could sense Lark crumbling warmly within him, already protective of the child that was growing within their mate. Andin and Luna Olwen were officially wedded in a human traditional way sometime afterwards, during which they received a certificate with Olwen's married name written on it. Landon and Stella's families were both in attendance, along with Gamma Josh, Dr. Enzo and Elise. Olwen's pregnancy was already well along by now, and they had announced the news to the rest of the Moon River Pack during the wedding ceremony. Alfil and gazed at her and her belly with a fond and very emotional expression. It was just the week after that a report came from a warrior from the Snowfang Pack, "Agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Luna Olwen vaguely recognized the dark-haired man that entered her office. The last time he'd seen him was the day he came to take Kylie to the Snowfang Pack, just after they found out they were mates. He'd looked so happy then. Now he didn't exactly look despondent, but more world-weary, if that made sense. Luna Olwen. Oliver bowed to her in greeting, moving to settle in the chair opposite Olwen's desk. "How have you been after? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Much better than I was at the start of the year." The woman joked softly, before her smile faded and she gazed at Oliver. "What about you?" There was no doubt that Oliver now knew of the true reason as to why Kylie had rejected him, as well as her death. "I'm okay, I guess." Oliver shrugged, his eyes briefly flickering to the desk and then back up. "At least there was closure for my wolf and I. We should have known, but I guess she was my mate. I loved her too much to notice something was wrong." He hesitated and then asked, "Did none of her living family members come forward to claim her body?" Olwen shook her head. "No good." Oliver nodded, his hazel irises dulling briefly as he spoke, his tone tinged with bitterness. "She deserved it." A period of silence passed through the room, and then Olwen spoke up again. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "What are you here for?" Oliver said, pressing his lips together tensely. "I saw Aaron." "What?" The man nodded, seeing the astonished response he was getting. He was in a convenience store at a gas station outside of the wilds, just on the way to another human town. "He seemed to be working there, and that's not all." Olwen tilted her head curiously. "He looked weak and distant, like a ghost. I sent one of my fellow pack warriors in to purchase something, and when I watched from outside, Aaron didn't even meet his eyes when he scanned his things and took care of the payment." And Oliver paused. "According to my friend, there was no scent coming from him. No scent." Olwen squinted in confusion as she thought of the possibilities. "You didn't see him wearing a bracelet or anything to suppress it, maybe?" Oliver shook his head. "No. Had he been wearing a bracelet, his scent would have been less obvious but still detectable by the sharpest wolf. There was no scent coming from him at all." Olwen took a moment to think this over. "Where is this?" "Be careful. At the first sign of trouble. Mind, link me." Alfil and unmumbled, his hand resting rather protectively on Olwen and their unborn son. "I will. Thank you, Landon." A couple of their other pack warriors were stationed around the area, posing as regular passers-by as Olwen headed out of Landon's car, shutting the door before heading towards the convenience store. She wore a simple soft green button-up dress and flats, her pale brown hair in a high ponytail. A doorbell sounded as soon as she entered, and he didn't look up, his eyes staring at the floor. Raising an eyebrow, the Luna walked past all the shelves of snacks and on-the-road necessities before arriving at a cashier. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The man's head shot up in an instant. Olwen, he breathed, his voice thin. The Luna studied him. Erin looked about the same as he did when she'd seen him last, but paler and more tired. He had faint circles beneath his eyes, and his face seemed more gaunt. His normally well-built physique appeared to have diminished as well. His driftwood scent was nowhere to be found. You look as beautiful as ever, Erin said softly, gazing at her with something akin to wonder, almost like a man looking at a mirage in the desert. And then his eyes eroded on her body with an amount of anguish and envy. Is that? I'm sure you're aware that there is a warrant out for your arrest in the wilds. Olwen cut him off, her voice quiet but stern. Erin actually flinched at her frosty tone. I know. He sighed, and what little light that had come back to his eyes dulled again. Well, let's get this over with. It's not like I can fight back if you take me in. What do you mean? Olwen eyed him cautiously. Ours is gone. Olwen. Erin answered, his voice barely audible. He returned to the moon goddess. He must have known from her expression that Olwen wasn't exactly trusting of his word, and how could she be at this point? So he sighed heavily and rolled back his sleeves and his pants, showing the lack of a scent concealment bracelet like Priscilla and Kylie both had. Wolfsbane, no. Seeing no one was coming into the store at the moment, Erin inhaled softly and ran a hand through his brown hair. It happened after I fled from the Moon River Pack and heard about the warrant for my arrest. I had a dream where a woman in white came to me and asked. And she knelt down and stretched out a hand to him. When I asked who she was and what she was doing, she didn't answer me directly. He hesitated. She said that she'd waited until after I was fully healed, but that this was my punishment. Unless my wolf wanted otherwise. Erin pressed his lips together as despondency came to his green eyes. To my agent extraordinaire, Lone, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Didn't even look at me. He left my side right away and went to her, and they vanished. So when I woke up, I realized I couldn't sense us anymore. He wasn't just shutting me out or keeping silent on me like he sometimes did. He was just gone. Olwen almost felt bad for Erin, the effects of losing his wolf already evident in his appearance. Sorry, Olwen, the man muttered, raising his head slightly. I deserved this for what I did to you. You can take me in and bring me in front of the Alpha King. I should pay for what I've done. I won't take you in. What? Erin stared at her in surprise, along with a smidgen of hope. If you were tried for your crimes, at best you would be tortured, and at worst you would be executed with silver like your father. Olwen responded calmly, I believe that your state now is punishment enough. But if you ever set foot back in the wilds again, they'll come for you. She stepped back and turned to leave. Olwen. Erin raised up a hand just as she was about to walk away. Yes. The man chewed his lower lip before he sighed quietly, his hand subconsciously reaching for hers. I love you. You know that, right? Olwen looked into the eyes of the man who a year ago had been the alpha-to-be of the Silver Arrow Pack, the mate she had waited her whole life for. Her first and last. She was not moved at all by his words. You wouldn't have cheated if you loved me. She saw Erin's face fall before she turned and strode out of the store, not glancing back so. How did it go? Elful and almost pulled her right into his arms the moment she sat back in his car, and was just as confused and surprised as she had been that Erin's scent was non-existent on her. Luna Olwen smiled at her mate and nodded. Let's go. One more to go. To my agent extraordinaire, Lone, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Landon had immediately choked on the chamomile tea he was drinking and rushed to the Pack hospital the moment he received a mind, link from Luna Olwen that she was in labor. Despite his heart pounding and Lark howling worriedly as his mate screamed giving birth for the first time, Landon stayed in the delivery room, clasping Olwen's hand the entire way until a cry pierced the air. Moments later, Luna Olwen clutched her wailing son in her arms, soothing him with a loving smile and tears of joy in her arms. "Hello there, little Percy Cartwright," she whispered softly, her and Landon having decided on a name once the gender of the baby had been identified. As the couple took turns to cradle and coo over their newborn son, their friends and family slowly came into the room once Dr. Enzo gave them the okay. "He's beautiful," Stella gushed, placing a hand on Olwen's shoulder as she gazed down at infant Percy with wonder. "He has Ulfil Endon's hair and your eyes. We have a grandson." Holly clasped her husband's arm, both with tearful smiles on their faces. Landon and Olwen made something lovely indeed. Percy had quieted down slightly by now in his mother's embrace, Olwen gently cradling him as he could and reached out his little hands as much as he could to his mother. Sylvie and Caden couldn't help smiling at the young boy themselves, Elijah standing next to Stella, and Joshua and Cale next to Landon. Caden was adjusting to his new lifestyle well, and his relationship with his family had slowly improved over the months. His initiation ceremony had occurred a few days ago. He'd had a minor charge against him for assisting Bradley, but it was made into commuter service for his new pack. He didn't mind, however, willingly accepting the consequences that came with what he had done. By now, Olwen's inner circle all knew of the visit that the moon goddess had paid to her in her dream. Stella had in turn revealed that Celine had come to her as well, informing her that Olwen was in the Moon River pack and confirming that as the true reason as to why she and her mother and brother drove halfway across the wilds to find them. Stella was surprised to learn of the moon goddess's test, but she was happy that Olwen would have been blessed by it either way. "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Stella said with a warm smile, gently wrapping a hand around Olwen's shoulders in an embrace. "You and Ulfil Endon will change the Evergreen Wilds for the better. I know it. I wouldn't have been able to accomplish this without you," Luna Olwen replied. Stella shrugged. "I was just staying by a friend," she said modestly. Landon softly inhaled Olwen's scent, a feeling of peace and happiness washing over him. Looking up at her mate as he held her, Olwen knew she felt the same way. The story of Silver Arrow Pack, from its very inception as the strongest pack in the Evergreen Wilds, to its downfall at the hands of corrupt leaders, has spread through the region. The Moon Goddess, witnessing what the Silver Arrow Pack had slowly changed into over the decades, tested Alpha Bradley and his son Aaron by fatting the son to an Omega, Olwen. An Omega that they perceived as weak and fragile, but nevertheless had a good heart and a strong will. But the Alpha and his son both failed the test. Believing his mate was too delicate to become the Luna of the Silver Arrow Pack, Aaron willingly gave into the wiles of another she, Wolf, and Alpha Bradley protected the couple by forcing Olwen to eject herself from the pack. Blessed by the Moon Goddess, the Omega wandered the wilds alone before meeting with Ulfil Endon of the Moon River Pack. Unlike Aaron, Landon accepted and was loyal to her for who she was, and he became her new fated mate. Over time, the already strong Moon River Pack flourished further with her influence, even more so after she became Luna. And the Moon Goddess didn't just bless her new mate and her new pack. They blessed those from her old pack who chose to ally with her. Her best friend, despite being up to become the Silver Arrow Pack's next beta, left her home behind with her mother to find Olwen, and eventually found her mate in the Moon River Pack. And as for the Silver Arrow Pack, they knew Lula was physically strong, but a cruel, selfish woman who threatened others with force the moment she didn't get to her way. With her leadership, what was once a great pack began to splinter, with many wolves choosing to desert the Alpha and Luna and begin their own lives in other parts of the wilds. For the sake of themselves and the future of the evergreen wilds, Alful and unfaced Bradley in a challenging one. In the meantime, Erin grew tired of his new mate and rejected her too, and after foolishly attempting to take over the Moon River pack, she was slain by Luna Olwen. And after trying forcibly to win his former fated back, Erin's wolf, already angry towards his human for giving her up in the first place, abandoned him. He now resides alone outside of the wilds, knowing that his ex-mate is now happy with a new family of her own. Let this tale remain a lesson, that loyalty to the right wolf is what truly brings strength. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel.